For most of my adult life, I carried a secret shame. It was a quiet, gnawing feeling of failure that followed me everywhere, from the moment I woke up to the moment I fell into a restless sleep. The shame was my inability to finish anything. I was the king of starting things. I had a graveyard of half-finished projects in my closet and on my hard drive, monuments to my own inconsistency. There was the half-written novel, the online coding course I abandoned after the third module, the guitar I bought with dreams of becoming a musician, now collecting dust in the corner, its strings silent and tarnished. I would begin each new venture with a fire of enthusiasm, a surge of manic energy. This, I would tell myself, this is the one. This is the project that will define me, the passion that will finally stick. For a week, maybe 2, I would be completely obsessed. But then, inevitably, the fire would flicker. The initial excitement would wane, replaced by a familiar, heavy sense of boredom and resistance. The daily practice would start to feel like a chore, and my eyes would begin to wander, searching for the next new thing, the next shiny object, the next hit of excitement. And the cycle would begin all over again, leaving me more disgusted with myself each time. I had a diagnosis for myself, a label I wore like a brand of shame. I was unmotivated. I believed I was fundamentally lacking in some essential human quality, a grit or a willpower that other, more successful people seemed to possess in abundance. I would look at people who had mastered a skill, built a business, or written a book, and I would see them as a different species of human, blessed with a focus and a drive that I could only dream of. I saw myself as lazy, flaky, and undisciplined. This self-diagnosis was a prison. It kept me trapped in a cycle of self-blame and inaction. If I was inherently unmotivated, then what was the point of even trying? The world around me only seemed to confirm my diagnosis. The internet was flooded with motivational gurus shouting at me to hustle harder, to crush my goals, to wake up at 5 a.m. and optimize every second of my day. Their message was clear. If you're not succeeding, you're not trying hard enough. Your failure is a personal, moral failing. And I believed them. I tried everything. I made vision boards, I wrote affirmations, I downloaded productivity apps that turned my to-do list into a video game. But nothing worked. The underlying pattern remained, and with each new failure, the shame burrowed deeper. The turning point didn't come from a new productivity hack or a burst of inspiration. It came from a place of quiet desperation and from a dead Austrian psychiatrist. I was in a particularly deep phase of self-loathing after abandoning yet another passion project, this time learning a new language. I felt like a complete fraud. And in my search for answers, I went deeper than the surface-level self-help. And I found Viktor Frankl. Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust and the founder of a school of psychotherapy called logotherapy, wrote about the human search for meaning. He argued that the primary drive in life is not pleasure, as Freud believed, or power, as Adler believed, but the discovery and pursuit of what we personally find meaningful. But it was a modern interpretation of his work in the context of our digital age that hit me like a lightning bolt. The critique suggested that our modern world, with its endless stream of information and entertainment, was actively working against our ability to find meaning. The problem wasn't that I lacked motivation. The problem was that I was drowning in a sea of overstimulation. My brain, like everyone's, is wired to seek out novelty and pleasure, and my smartphone was a fire hose of both. Social media, with its infinite scroll of new images and outrage. News sites, with their breaking alerts and sensational headlines. Streaming services with their endless libraries of content, all available instantly. Each notification, each like, each new video was a tiny, fleeting hit of dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical. I wasn't lazy, I was an addict. I was addicted to the shallow, the easy, the instant. And this addiction was destroying my ability to engage in the deep, difficult, and meaningful work that long-term goals require. Deep work, like learning an instrument or writing a book, offers a different kind of reward. It's a slow-burn satisfaction, a deep sense of purpose that only comes after hours of focused, often frustrating effort. It can't compete with the instant gratification of a 30-second video or a controversial tweet. My brain had been trained to prefer the cheap candy of digital distraction over the nourishing meal of meaningful work. I wasn't unmotivated. My motivation was simply being hijacked, diverted, and exhausted by 1,000 tiny, meaningless stimuli every single day. This realization was a paradigm shift. It lifted the immense weight of shame from my shoulders. For the first time, I saw that the problem might not be a fundamental flaw in my character, but a fundamental flaw in my environment. I wasn't a failed person. I was a person living in a failed system, a system designed to fracture my attention for profit. This new perspective gave me something I hadn't felt in years: hope. If the problem was my environment, then I could change my environment. And so, I began a radical experiment. I decided to go on a dopamine fast. It wasn't about punishing myself or living like a monk. It was about intentionally and systematically removing the sources of cheap, easy stimulation from my life to allow my brain's reward system to reset. It was about creating space for true motivation to emerge. The first step was brutal. I deleted every social media app from my phone. I deleted the news apps. I deleted YouTube. The silence was immediate and deafening. My thumb would reflexively move to where the icons used to be, finding only an empty space. I felt a twitchy, anxious energy, a constant urge to check something, to consume something. I realized how deeply the habit was ingrained. My brain was like a spoiled child, screaming for its candy. I set strict rules for myself. I would only check email twice a day, at noon and at 5 p.m. I would only read the news once a day for 15 minutes from a single, high-quality source. I turned off every single notification on my phone and computer. The only things that could interrupt me were a phone call or a text message from a real human being. The most important and most difficult rule was this: I had to force boredom into my life. When I was waiting in line, standing on the subway, or had a few minutes of downtime, I was forbidden from pulling out my phone. I had to just be. I had to stand there and look at the world around me. I had to sit in silence and be alone with my own thoughts. The first week was unbearable. The boredom was a physical sensation, an itch under my skin. The silence was filled with the noise of my own anxious mind. I felt restless, irritable, and profoundly lonely. I was experiencing withdrawal. I hadn't realized how much I relied on the constant stream of digital noise to distract me from myself, to numb the low-grade anxiety of just being human. Without my digital pacifier, I was forced to feel everything. But then slowly, something began to change. By the second week, the twitchiness started to subside. The silence started to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. It was a space. And in that space, things began to emerge. My own thoughts, which had been drowned out by the shouting of the internet, began to surface. They were quieter, more nuanced. I started noticing things again. The way the light hit the buildings in the morning, the intricate patterns of leaves on a tree, the faces of the people around me. My senses felt sharper, as if the world had been switched from standard definition to high definition. And in that quiet space, an old, familiar voice, one I hadn't heard since I was a child, began to speak. It was the voice of curiosity, of wonder. It wasn't shouting. It was a whisper. It would ask, "What if you tried this?" Or, "Wouldn't it be interesting to learn about that?" It was the voice of my own intrinsic motivation, and for the first time in years, I could actually hear it. This journey led me to the climax, a moment so simple and yet so profound, it stands as a landmark in my memory. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. I had been on my dopamine fast for about a month. I was bored. The old me would have immediately reached for a screen, diving into a movie marathon or a video game to kill the time. The urge was still there, a faint echo of my old addiction, but my new rules held me back. I wandered aimlessly around my apartment, feeling the familiar restlessness. My eyes scanned the room, looking for something, anything, to latch onto. And then they landed on it. The guitar. It was sitting in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust, a symbol of my past failures. I had bought it 3 years ago with a surge of passion, convinced I would become the next great singer-songwriter. I had abandoned it after 3 weeks. Normally, looking at it would have filled me with a wave of shame. But this time, something was different. In the silence of my overstimulated mind, I felt a different emotion, a gentle curiosity. I walked over, picked it up, and wiped the dust off with my sleeve. I sat down on the couch. I didn't have any grand ambitions. I wasn't thinking about becoming a rock star. I just wanted to see what would happen. I opened up a beginner's lesson on my laptop. My use of technology was now intentional, not reflexive, and I started to play. My fingers were clumsy. The sounds I made were clunky and dissonant. It was frustrating. It was difficult, but I stayed with it. There was nothing else competing for my attention. There were no notifications popping up, no urge to check my feed. It was just me, the guitar, and the challenge. I played for an hour, and then another. And as I practiced the same simple chord progression over and over, something magical happened. For a brief moment, my clumsy fingers found the right placement, and a clean, beautiful chord rang out in the quiet room. It was just one chord, but it was perfect. And in that moment, I felt a surge of joy so profound, so pure, it almost brought me to tears. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the cheap, fleeting buzz of a social media like. It was a deep, resonant satisfaction. It was the joy of creation, the joy of overcoming a challenge, the joy of deep, focused engagement. That one perfect chord gave me more fulfillment than 1,000 hours of mindless scrolling ever had. That was the moment I truly understood. I didn't need more motivation. I needed less distraction. I didn't need to hustle harder. I needed to create more silence. The motivation had been there all along, buried under a mountain of digital noise. Today, my life is different. I haven't abandoned technology, but my relationship with it has fundamentally changed. It is now a tool that I use, not a master that uses me. The dusty graveyard of half-finished projects has been replaced by a small, thriving garden of meaningful pursuits. I'm still learning the guitar. I'm slowly, steadily working on that novel. I haven't mastered anything yet, but for the first time, I'm not focused on the destination. I'm in love with the process. The daily act of showing up, of engaging in deep, focused work, has become its own reward. The great lesson I learned is that motivation is not something you have to manufacture. It is an innate human drive, a natural spring that flows from within. But that spring can be easily blocked. In our modern world, it is being blocked by a constant barrage of overstimulation, a culture that celebrates distraction as connection. To find our motivation, we must first have the courage to be bored. We must have the discipline to unplug from the noise and create the sacred silence where our own true purpose can finally speak to us. And what about you? What projects are lying dormant in your own life, buried under the noise? What could you accomplish if you had the courage to disconnect, to embrace the silence, and to listen to the quiet voice within? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read it.